thorough examination of genuine discipleship versus routine institutional religion. Are we genuinely following Jesus, or just going through the motions of a tradition made in his name? Imagine a man walks into your city, not in robes, not with a halo, but wearing torn sandals and having calloused hands. He doesn't quote creeds, he doesn't ask for tithes. He kneels beside the homeless, talks to outcasts, touches lepers, and dines with ex-cons. Would we recognise him, or would we dismiss him for not fitting the structure we've come to call church? "Why do you call me Lord, and do not do what I say?" Luke 6:46. From the dusty roads of Galilee to the megachurch pulpits of the 21st century, the name of Jesus has travelled far. But has his message? Philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once warned, "The biggest threat to Christianity isn't heresy, but those who believe they are Christians yet live as if Christ never existed." Today, Christianity is often associated with institutions, rituals, and denominations. Yet, the man who started it had no building, no title, and no theological degree. Archaeological studies indicate that the early followers of Jesus met in homes, caves, and open fields, not in temples. They broke bread, shared possessions, and risked persecution not for doctrines, but for a way of life. And yet, somewhere along the way, discipleship was replaced by routine. The radical became respectable. The revolutionary became ritual. What happened? If Jesus returned today, would he walk into your church or flip over its tables? What starts as a fire often ends in a monument. Jesus preached a kingdom not of this world, yet within centuries his name crowned emperors, cathedrals, and conquests. "My kingdom is not of this world," John 18:36. But after his crucifixion, something changed. The early underground movement, radical, communal, and persecuted, was eventually taken over by the empire. In 313 AD, the Edict of Milan legalized Christianity throughout the Roman Empire. By 380 AD, it became the official state religion. Soon, bishops held court alongside Caesars. Gold replaced simplicity and dogma replaced dialogue. Was this divine providence or a political strategy? Elaine Pagels, scholar of early Christianity, writes, "What was once a diverse chorus of voices is becoming a single imperial creed. Anthropologically, this isn't unique. When radical ideas threaten existing power structures, those in control often co-opt them, turning rebellion into tradition. By canonizing certain gospels and labeling others as heresy, institutional Christianity simplified Jesus' legacy into something more manageable. The Jesus who challenged systems, stood with women, and undermined hierarchies was gradually rebranded as domesticated, predictable, and safe. And yet the question remains, would the historical Jesus recognize the religion that bears his name? Or has the church become, as Nietzsche suggested, a tomb where the living Christ is laid beneath centuries of doctrine? When a revolution turns into a religion, what is lost, and who benefits from forgetting? Who holds the pen, shapes the gospel? The words of Jesus were first spoken in Aramaic, the language of the streets, the marginalized, daily bread, and whispered prayers. However, what we read today has undergone numerous translations, each shaped by context, theology, and politics, in Greek, Latin, and beyond. In the beginning was the Word, John 1:1. But which word, in what language, and interpreted by whom? When the scriptures were translated into Greek, the Septuagint, and later into Latin, the Vulgate, choices were made. Kingdom replaced kinship. The church replaced the assembly. Sinners replaced outsiders. Innocent verbs became the foundation of entire theologies. Linguist George Steiner once wrote, "Every translation is an interpretation, a reflection not of the original text, but of the translator's world." The early church, eager to align with Roman structure, borrowed not only its roads but also its rhetoric. Words like Dominus Lord carried imperial connotations. A radical teacher was now called king, a humble prophet, now a sovereign. Biblical anthropology reveals that many Hebraic idioms were either lost or softened to serve the theological objectives of the empire and the clergy. And with each translation, the Jesus of Nazareth became more like the rulers he once opposed. What happens when the sacred becomes scripted to fit the state? If the original gospel was good news for the poor, who did it become suitable for once Rome learned to read it? They didn't just go to church, they became the church. The book of Acts portrays the earliest followers of Jesus not as mere attendees, but as active participants in a vibrant living movement. They dedicated themselves to the apostles' teachings, to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and prayer. All the believers were together and had everything in common. Acts 2, 42-44. There were no pews, no pulpits, no performances, just people, radically sharing food, resources, and burdens. A table, not a stage. Anthropological records indicate that early Christian gatherings frequently took place in homes, catacombs, or outdoor spaces. The emphasis was not on hierarchy, but on mutual accountability, spiritual gifts, and community life. No church bulletins, no VIP sections. They gathered under threat, not for comfort, but for courage. So how did this lively community turn into a spectator event? As the church became more institutionalized, it adopted the architecture of empire. Basilicas replaced homes, clergy replaced conversation, the altar was raised, the people silenced. Theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer warned, "Christianity without discipleship is always Christianity without Christ." The result? Faith was observed, not truly felt. Crowds took the place of community. Obedience replaced genuine transformation. And so, we must ask, are we truly following Jesus, or merely observing those who claim to do so? The early church was not just an audience, it was a movement. Have we chosen applause over action? When faith is put on display, truth becomes a costume. Walk into many churches today and what do you see? Lights, sound, a platform, a performance? But is this truly worship or just a performance? These people honour me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Matthew 15:8. From Jesus' own words came a warning. Ritual can serve as a refuge for hypocrisy. In the early days of the faith, worship was raw and spontaneous. Songs came from pain, not pretense. Testimonies were trembling, not rehearsed. No fog machines, just fire in the bones. But as institutional religion grew, formality often replaced genuine faith. Vestments became more ornate. Sermons turned into performances. People learned to look holy, even when their hearts felt far away. Philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, though deeply critical, saw it clearly. The Christian's decision to see the world as ugly and evil has caused the world to become ugly and evil. When theology turns into theatre, truth becomes just role play. Holiness turns into habit, and the church turns into a weekly audition for a part no one truly understands. Even Jesus criticized public displays of faith. When you pray, do not be like the hypocrites. They love to be seen by men. Matthew 6:5. But today, are we still praying to God? Or to an audience? True faith doesn't require a spotlight. It manifests in silence, service, and sacrifice. So why have we put it on display? When questioning turns into betrayal, the truth is held hostage. In many churches today, asking the wrong question can cost you everything: your ministry, your reputation, and even your place at the table. Come now, let us reason together. Isaiah 1:18. God invites dialogue, but often religion does not. How did we arrive here? Historically, institutional religion has relied on conformity to maintain control. The Nicene Creed, while serving as a foundation for orthodoxy, also created boundaries between insiders and heretics. Disagreeing wasn't just an intellectual difference, it often led to exile. Anthropologically, every tribe has its boundaries. But in the church, those boundaries were often guarded with fear rather than love. Ask too much, and you'll be labelled rebellious. Doubt too sincerely, and you're marked as dangerous. Philosopher Søren Kierkegaard lamented, "The greatest enemy of Christianity is not doubt, but complacency disguised as faith." Even today, church culture can condition people to suppress their curiosity to maintain harmony. Silence your questions, wear the mask, blend in, or face exclusion. But Jesus never punished questions, he welcomed them. He responded to Nicodemus, to Thomas, to a bleeding woman, to a foreigner at a well, not with condemnation, but with truth that invites transformation. So why does church culture often fear the very curiosity Christ embraced? Belonging should never cost you your voice. If truth cannot survive your questions, was it ever really truth? Two names, one history. But are we worshipping the same individual? The Jesus of the Gospels walks dusty roads, weeps with mourners, eats with outcasts, and flips tables in holy anger. The Jesus of popular culture smiles politely, blesses nations, waves from stained glass, and never disrupts the status quo. Foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Luke 9:58. The true Jesus was homeless, politically rebellious, and spiritually challenging. He didn't seek admiration, he demanded loyalty. But centuries of art, theology, and ideology have transformed him into someone safer, Western, whitened, wealthy, a mascot more than a messiah. Historian Yaroslav Pelikan once remarked, "Jesus has been the man for all seasons and all ideologies. He's been portrayed as both a socialist and a capitalist, a peacemaker and a warrior, a nationalist and a rebel. But the scriptures remain steadfast. They depict a man who dined with sinners, touched the unclean, challenged religious elites, and taught that the last shall be first." Anthropologically, when cultures adopt a religious figure, they often shape him in their image. This process, called syncretism, can weaken the original purpose, resulting in a version of faith that supports the dominant order. So, which Jesus do we follow? The one who comforts the comfortable, or the one who comforts the afflicted and afflicts the comfortable? If your version of Jesus always agrees with you, never challenges your authority, and fits perfectly into your culture, is it him? What's left unsaid often speaks the loudest. There are topics Jesus discussed that we barely speak about in modern pulpits: greed, abuse of power, the treatment of the poor, and hypocrisy among religious leaders. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You shut the door of the kingdom in people's faces. Matthew 23:13. But over time, the church learned to modify the message, not by erasing scripture, but by emphasizing some verses and disregarding others. Sexuality receives sermons. Social justice? Often met with silence. Tithing? Frequent reminders. Economic oppression? Seldom addressed. Philosopher Michel Foucault called this discursive control, the power not only to speak but also to define what is worth discussing. In anthropology, cultures establish taboos to safeguard the dominant narrative. Church culture sometimes does the same. Reflect on the colonial legacy of missions. Hierarchies hide the abuse scandals, the silence around racism, sexism, and exploitation, all present but concealed in theological fog. Theologian Howard Thurman asked, "Why has religion sometimes become a tool for perpetuating injustice? It's not that the Bible is silent, it's that some pulpits are, and when silence turns into strategy, sacred truth becomes biased, not prophetic. What the church refuses to say might be exactly what Jesus is still trying to communicate through us. Are we listening? If the building disappears, does your faith survive? What remains when you remove the choir, the stained glass, the sermons and the systems? For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I with them." Matthew 18:20. Jesus never commanded building a sanctuary. He built no temple. He left no liturgical blueprint. Instead, he created a movement, mobile, relational, raw. Yet today, for many, Christianity remains closely tied to institutions, membership roles, denominational labels, programs, policies, and parking lots. But a new generation is awakening. Across the world, people are leaving traditional church buildings not out of rebellion, but because of hunger. Hunger for authenticity, for integrity, for Jesus, not just tradition in his name. Sociologists refer to this as the rise of the nones, those who believe deeply but do not belong to any formal group. And maybe that's closer to the original model. The early Jesus movement was never formally organised. It was spiritually alive. Believers gathered wherever they could, in homes, by riversides, underground. They didn't go to official services, they lived out the gospel. Philosopher Alan Watts once said, "Institutions often replace the very purposes for which they were designed." So maybe the question isn't where is your church, but what do your footsteps say about who you follow? You don't need a steeple to follow the shepherd, but you do need a life that reflects his. Faith was never intended to be just believed. It is meant to be lived. Before they were called Christians, Jesus' followers were known as people of the way, Acts 9:2. Not people of doctrine, not people of denomination, but of a way, a path, a practice, a lived truth. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. Luke 9:23. This is not a metaphor, it's movement. Following Jesus wasn't just about believing the right creeds. It was about forgiving enemies, feeding the hungry, standing with the oppressed, losing to win, dying to live. It was never safe, never socially acceptable, and certainly never comfortable. Philosopher Dallas Willard once said, "The greatest issue facing the world today is whether those who identify as Christians will truly become disciples." In reclaiming the way, we return to a faith that focuses less on Sunday performance and more on Monday decisions. Less about theological correctness and more about radical compassion. Less about tradition and more about transformation. This isn't a rejection of the church, it's a return to Christ. Not to an icon, not to an institution, but to a carpenter from Nazareth who invited the world to walk with him, not just worship him. What if the church isn't the destination but the launch pad? Are we walking the way, or just standing still under the signpost? Maybe we didn't leave Jesus. Maybe we've just been following someone else in his name. We've walked through temples and tombs, through translations, traditions, creeds, and cathedrals, through the rituals we've inherited, and the silence we've maintained, and now we face a question that won't let us go. Have we been worshipping Jesus, or the idea of him shaped by centuries of power, fear, and comfort? The historical Jesus did not establish an organization. He created a way of life. He challenged empires and honored those often overlooked. He spoke in parables, not formulas. He led through service, not control. And yet, somewhere along the way, we turned that wild, liberating truth into something safe, predictable, organized, branded. Philosopher Simone Weil stated, "Imaginary evil is romantic and varied. Real evil is gloomy, monotonous, barren. Imaginary good is boring. Real good is always fresh, wonderful, intoxicating." What if we've mistaken the form for the fire? What if the truth of Jesus still lives, not in what we've constructed around him, but in what we're willing to risk for love, justice, and truth? Because if faith is merely routine, it cannot be set free. If discipleship is limited to attendance, it cannot transform lives. And if Jesus is just a symbol, he can no longer be followed. So now the question isn't about doctrine, it's about existence. Do we follow Jesus, or just church culture? If all your inherited elements, such as the buildings, music, traditions, and titles, were gone, what remains of your faith? And would it still reflect Jesus? If we've mistaken the signpost for the destination, if we've inherited illusions dressed as truth, then this is not just a critique, it's an invitation. What if following Jesus isn't just about believing harder, but about walking differently? What would your faith look like without the structure, without the label, without the script? Let's open the dialogue. What resonated most in this documentary? Where do you see the gap between Jesus and church culture today? What does walking the way mean to you? Subscribe to Promesa Chronicles for more in-depth explorations of the sacred, the silenced, and those still searching. Drop a comment, start a conversation, and help others hear what tradition may have drowned out. This isn't rebellion, this is remembrance.